My name is Elizabeth Whitaker, and I am a senior planner with the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission. I'm here to talk a little bit about the 2020 census and some activities that are underway to help prepare the region for this important activity. So hopefully you're familiar with the census, but since it's something that we only do once every 10 years, it's not always front of mind. The U.S. Constitution does mandate that we have a complete count of everyone residing in the United States every 10 years, and so the next census is going to take place in 2020. The goal of this census is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. So while the census is still about a year away, work is underway to help prepare the region for a complete and accurate count. So a complete and accurate count during the census is of critical importance because we do have to live with the outcomes of this for the next 10 years. And unfortunately with the census, we don't get to have a do-over. So this really is our once-in-a-decade opportunity to get this right. So why is it important that we get this right? Again, it's something we're doing once every 10 years, but it actually has a pretty significant impact on our day-to-day lives. Census data is used to apportion congressional seats between the states. It's used to draw legislative boundaries, voting precincts, and so on. So it's about representation. But more importantly, it's about funding. So there are more than $675 billion in federal funds that are allocated every single year using census data. And that's a really big number, so I'm going to say it again, $675 billion with a B. We also know that the state uses census data to allocate some of its resources, so it's really about getting a fair share of funding and resources for our communities. Also, census data is used to guide decision-making in the public sector, private sector, nonprofit, and academic sectors. So I'm just going to quickly show this slide. I don't mean for you to read it. I know there's a lot going on here, but that's kind of exactly the point of this slide. So this has nearly 50 ways that census data is used. So as I mentioned, it's critical for decision making across all levels of government. We know our business community uses it to make decisions. Community service providers, nonprofits, academic researchers use this information. And because so many people are using it, we want to make sure it's as accurate as possible. So, as I mentioned, the census is in 2020, and specifically Census Day is April 1st. So go ahead and mark your calendars. And in the lead up to Census Day, we'll be working to make sure that the communities here across the Miami Valley are ready for a complete and accurate count. So this upcoming census is really important to us here in the Miami Valley, and it's definitely been identified as a priority for those of us at the Regional Planning Commission. And I want to walk you through a couple of examples that I hope will help make the case. So we'll start here with this map. You see we've got Montgomery County here. And this map shows a census developed metric that gives an indication of census participation. It's what they anticipate participation levels will be in the upcoming census. So this is their low response score, or LRS. And I'm going to show this a couple times throughout the rest of my slides. And so basically looking at the scale, the purple and blue areas are areas that are anticipated to have lower levels of participation. And as you move towards the green and yellows, those are expected to have higher levels. Well, this is really important because for every person that isn't counted or isn't counted in the right place, there are risks to the resources that come back to our communities. And you can see that here in Montgomery County, we do have quite a few of those areas that do fall in those lower bounds of anticipated participation. So, an inaccurate count costs our communities resources. So a recent study out of the George Washington Institute of Public Policy was able to assess what an inaccurate count, the impact that it could have. So they examined 5 Health and Human Services grant programs. So this included things like Medicaid and CHIP and a couple of programs related to children's services. And because of how these particular programs are funded, they were able to tell what an inaccurate count would have, like the impact that it would. And so their analysis showed that in 2015, for every person that wasn't counted in the previous census in Ohio, there was a fiscal loss to the state of over $1,200. So I have been told that $1,200 is not a compelling figure. But when we look at that with some more detail, you'll see that it actually is. So this is a $1,200 value on an annual basis. I mentioned earlier we live with our census outcomes for 10 years. So you can take this figure, multiply it by 10, and see the 10-year impact. So that starts to be a bigger number. This is also a per person number. We are a state of more than 11 million people. So imagine if we missed 1% of our population. You can start to see what those numbers start looking like. And I think for me, one of the most interesting parts of this data is that this was looking at 5 programs, just in Health and Human Services. There are more than 300 programs that the federal government uses census statistics to allocate funding from. So you can see that there can be a really, really significant impact on the resources that come back to our state and back to our communities if we don't get everyone counted accurately. And so one final reason why we're particularly interested in this has to do with representation. So we've got a headline out of the Dayton Daily News earlier this year. We know that Ohio is not a high-growth state like some of the southern and western states, so it's possible that we could be losing one of our congressional seats following this upcoming census. So for these reasons, we want to make sure that we're not undercounting our population in any way. So the census is a really massive undertaking. I actually recently learned that it is the largest peacetime effort that the federal government undertakes, so it's huge. And because it is so massive, and again, going back to that, we only do this once every 10 years, the Census Bureau could actually use local support in their execution of the census. So generally, local support that governments can provide is either operational support or promotional support. So I have a couple of examples of each listed there. This is not an exhaustive list, but just meant to give you an idea of the kinds of ways that we can help the Census Bureau with the execution of the census. I will focus in on that promotional support for a couple moments because this is actually an incredibly effective and really easy way that local governments can help out with the census. Just bringing awareness to the census, reminding people that it's happening, it's safe, it's easy. It can be really critical to increasing our participation levels. So the Census Bureau is encouraging local governments to talk about the census in your newsletters, your websites, or however you're engaging with your residents. In order to help facilitate that and to make it easy for you, they're preparing a number of materials that can be simply dropped into your newsletters, your utility bills. They've got social media content. They have all of this prepared, and I've got a couple of examples here on the slide. It's really straightforward, easy to understand information, and as we get closer and closer to the census, they'll be providing more content, which would be available at the link that's shown there. Another way that we can provide promotional support to the Census Bureau is through the Complete Count Committee. So a Complete Count Committee is a volunteer committee. It's established by either a tribal, state, or local government. Absent those groups, local community leaders can establish one. And the Complete Count Committee's goal is to increase awareness about the census and motivate residents to respond when it's census time. So there are a number of reasons why you may want to form a committee or participate in one, but ultimately the name of the game is that complete and accurate count. So as we know, we've got populations that are hard to survey or have reservations about participating in the census. We also know that a lot of the resources that support those same populations, and frankly go to support all of us, rely on census data to provide those. So we really are at a disadvantage if we don't get everyone counted. So the Complete Count Committee aims to bring trusted voices to the process to help increase awareness and motivate community members to participate when it's time. So when forming a Complete Count Committee, these are the types of resources or groups you may want to target. Complete Count Committees are intended to be highly customizable to meet each community's unique makeup and needs. Here locally in Dayton, Montgomery County, they actually got a pretty early start on this and established a committee over a year ago. In fact, they were the first committee to be established in the state. They recognize that, we do have a pretty high concentration of these hard-to-count populations. They know that there are changes coming to this upcoming census. For example, this will be the first census that you can respond to online. They also understood that there were a number of resources that were at risk. So because of this, they saw the value in forming a committee. So our local committee is chaired by Ms. Nicole Miller. She's Community Relations Manager at the Greater Dayton RTA. Prior to that, she did work with the Census Bureau for a number of years, so she's uniquely qualified and in an excellent position to lead this group. On this slide, you'll see that there are 9 areas where this Complete Count Committee is focusing its efforts. They felt that these were the areas where they could get the biggest bang for their buck or the most impact. And I've identified some of the folks that have been identified as leaders in those areas. So we've brought together a lot of people across a number of different sectors to help carry out the Complete Count Committee's mission. The Complete Count Committee here locally is focused on using data-driven metrics to guide their outreach, and to support that, we have developed a couple of products. We've got a couple here that I'm showing that use those, or the low response score, so we've got them available by jurisdiction, so you can see all of the census tracts that are in your city. You can see where they anticipate the participation levels to be. For those tracts that have those lower levels of participation, so that would be the blue and purple ones that were on the maps, we've developed a more detailed fact sheet. This highlights some of the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics for that area. It helps us understand a little bit better about who lives there and maybe the types of techniques that you might want to use to reach out to those people. In addition to this, I've got a lot of other data and information available, and we're happy to prepare and provide items if it would help you in any way with census outreach. While the census is still about a year away, the time to get ready, especially here at the local level, is now. So we're encouraging you to get involved with our local Complete Count Committee. Just use your networks to help spread awareness about the census, talk about why it's important, why participation is key. If you've got time and energy to dedicate resources to advancing census activities, that would be great. We really do think that the return on investment to our communities will be really meaningful. And again, we do live with the outcomes of this for the next 10 years. So we just want to get that complete and accurate count.